I wired $91,000 to my son for my grandchildren while I was living an ocean away. When I finally knocked on their door with the receipts and a heart full of pride, my grandchildren stared at me like I was a liar. They had never seen a dime. That night I promised myself I would make the truth undeniable in a courtroom, and months later I watched the sheriff tape an auction notice to my son's front door. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. I kept the bank receipts in a heavy cream envelope, the kind you use for wedding invitations or last letters. It felt wrong to bring it to a family dinner, but I had promised myself I would hand each grandchild a letter of my own making, 1 page, handwritten, with a short blessing and a summary of every wire I had sent in their name. I am 74. My name is Marcus Avery. I have lived long enough to see patience be mistaken for weakness, and generosity be mistaken for foolishness. I do not mind being called a fool. I mind being used. I tucked the envelope inside my jacket and rehearsed nothing. Decades ago, when Delia, my wife, was alive, she would tell me to script my difficult conversations. Practice the sentences. Test the tone. Delia has been gone for 8 years, and in her absence my ears have sharpened but my tongue has slowed. I do not argue the way I used to. I listen. I watch. I record. The taxi turned into the cul-de-sac and stopped in front of my son's house, a beige stucco box with a red front door and a lawn the color of a patient who has not seen the sun. A wind chime tinkled on the porch though there was no wind. I paid the driver, hefted my small suitcase, and climbed the steps. The brass door knocker was shaped like an anchor. Appropriate, I thought, for a house built on the weight of the unseen. The door swung open before I could knock twice. "Dad," Adam said, bright as a salesman's morning. He hugged me, perfumed with aftershave and the stress of a man who organizes his smile. "Look at you. Tan. Portugal agrees with you." "It does," I said. It made a gentleman out of me. He laughed, stepping aside. The living room smelled of lemon cleaner, cooked onions, and a new rug. On the mantel, Delia's photo, her short silver hair, that smile with a small chip on the front tooth, looked out over a row of framed school pictures. My grandchildren. 3 of them. Nora, 23 now. Caleb, 21. Eva, 19. The pictures stopped last year. Grandpa. A voice from the hallway. Nora, taller than I remembered, hair pulled back, jeans, an oversized sweater. She came to me quickly, but there was a note in her step that made me brace. We embraced. Caleb followed with a one-armed hug that tried to be grown but was still boy. Eva peered around the kitchen doorway like a deer that has learned to feed from a hand without trusting the arm. Dinner's almost ready, Adam said. Sit, sit. You should tell us about your trip. Trip. I have lived in Setúbal for 3 years now. It was supposed to be a year of learning to be alone that turned into a home. I rent a ferry-side apartment that smells of salt and bread, and I have made friends with a baker who refuses to take money from me on Tuesdays because I remind him of his father. My life is quieter, my ears ring less than they used to. I swim in cold water. I paint. I read. I send money. The table was already set. Roasted chicken, potatoes, broccolini. A salad that could feed 5 if 2 of them pretended to like radishes. On each plate, a cloth napkin folded like a sail. I kept the envelope close, pressed into my jacket by the angle of my elbow against the chair. We ate like a family that has forgotten what it means to eat as a family, Half the meal was performed for the television mounted on the wall, with a cooking show muttering about spice rubs while our conversation wandered like a dog looking for the door. "How's the apartment?" Nora asked finally. "You still near the blue and white ferry?" "I am," I said. "The mornings are loud with gulls, and the afternoons quiet enough that I can hear the cork trees think." She smiled. Caleb grinned down into his plate. Eva watched me from under her hair. "And you're teaching art?" Caleb said. "I am learning art," I corrected. "From people who have less to say and more to show." He nodded as if he understood. He would, perhaps, one day. "So," Adam said, clearing his throat. "Dad, I got your text. You wanted to give the kid something." "That was very generous, but you already, well, you have been generous." "You do not have to." I took the envelope out and put it on the table. It made a sound louder than paper ought to make. A sound like a stamp on a passport. "This is not a gift," I said. "It is a record." I passed the first letter to Nora. The second to Caleb. The third to Eva. Each letter had 3 numbers on it, dates, amounts, and a sentence or two about intent. The numbers were heavy. They were not round. Step by step, month by month, over 3 years, the totals rose like tide. Nora read the first line. Then the second. She blinked. Caleb frowned. His finger traced one date as if checking it against a memory. He had no memory of that day. Eva held the page with both hands as if it might break. "What is this?" Nora asked. Her voice was steady as she tried to keep it from trembling. "Records of the money I wired home for you," I said. "For your tuition, Nora. For the car repair, Caleb, and the community college classes you wanted and never took because you said you could not afford them. For Eva's summer program in Santa Cruz. For rent and groceries. It is all there. I wrote the bank memos myself. Adam told me to. He said it would be simpler, cleaner. He handled the distribution. He said you asked him to. Silence has its own temperature. It cooled the entire room. Eva shook her head slowly as if dislodging water from her ears. Caleb put the letter down and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Nora looked at me the way someone looks at a map that contradicts the landscape. "Grandpa," she said carefully. "We did not, these amounts, this cannot be for us." "It is," I said. "It was intended for you. We never, Dad never said, you sent money, sure, around Christmas, a few times, like $100, but this," she glanced at the total at the bottom of the page. "This says 34,000. Mine says 28, Caleb muttered. 29, Eva whispered, barely a voice at all. We all looked at Adam. A father should not be cornered by his own children at his own table. I am sympathetic to that. But sympathy can stand beside anger and not lose height. He tried to laugh. It came out as a cough. Dad, come on. We talked about this. You told me to use my judgment. I used it. The kids did not need cash in their hands. They needed a stable home. Groceries. I paid off the minivan. I fixed the roof. You think school books and gas and food grow on trees? Adam, I said. I wrote in the memo fields what the money was for. You copied those memos in your emails. You told me Nora thanked you for the tuition help. She sent you a voice note, you said. She did, he said quickly. Well. She left one in the group chat. No, Nora said. Her face had changed. She was no longer steady. I did not. You did, Adam said. Maybe you forgot. Last winter. After the bursar. I did not, she repeated, louder. And the bursar would not have been my problem anyway because I took out loans, Dad. A loan. You said we did not have help. You said we had to grow up. Caleb's chair skidded back a few inches. You told me Grandpa cut me off for missing that algebra exam senior year. I told you we had to budget, Adam snapped. Because your grandfather wanted to run his retirement from a beach like a prince while I kept this family together. I sent what you asked, I said. I sent more than you asked, at times, because you sent me pictures. Grocery lists. Receipts you said the kids could not cover. I asked for none of that. You volunteered it. He ran a hand through his hair and exhaled through his nose. I did what I had to do to keep us from drowning. That is what a father does. What a father does, I said softly, is pass along his grandfather's help when he says he will. We ate nothing more. No one reached for seconds. The show on the television laughed at a joke none of us heard. The wind chime on the porch finally found the breeze. I stayed the night in a guest room that had become a storage closet. I did not sleep. I lay listening to the house settle and creak the way old ships do under strange currents. Once, near 3 in the morning, I thought I heard Adam in the kitchen, walking circles. Every few steps he stopped, perhaps staring at the sink, perhaps at the door, perhaps at his reflection in the dark glass. When Delia died, I did not learn the full scope of her kindness until I found the folder marked Mercy in the back of her desk. In it were receipts I did not recognize, checks to cousins who needed rent, deposits for friends' surgeries, envelopes of cash for a neighbor's winter oil. She had never told me. I had missed thank yous that were never mine. After I found the folder, I asked myself whether love is more itself when it is loud or when it is quiet. I decided quiet love leaves fewer debts. That is how, after I sold our house, I chose Portugal. It is a place where a man can practice quiet without being lonely. I rented the apartment above the bakery because the dough starts at 3 in the morning and the smell woke me like a friendly alarm. I learned to greet in Portuguese and to apologize in Portuguese. I learned that a cafe says more to a person than talk can. I found a bench by the river and read there until the river learned my name. I lived on my teacher pension, my savings, and the small monthly check from the sale of the house, which I invested poorly twice and then learned to leave sleeping. I am not a rich man if what you admire is the multiplication of dollars. But I am rich in having fewer needs than the version of me who used to count hours as if they were coins. When Adam wrote that Nora needed $5,000 for tuition because of a clerical error, I wired 6. He wrote that Caleb had an alternator issue that would prevent him from getting to his job if it were not fixed that week, I wired 3. He sent me a picture of Eva's acceptance into a summer environmental science program at Santa Cruz, an opportunity, he called it, that would make her who she was meant to be. I wired 10 and smiled after I pressed send, picturing her walking among redwoods with a notebook and a good pen. The first year the amounts were modest. Then the world broke in half and everything became more expensive, and the wires grew, and my habits shrank. I stopped buying wine with dinner. I painted with cheap brushes. I wore my shoes until they softened like bread. None of it felt like sacrifice. It felt like purpose. That is one of the quiet loves that Delia taught me. Money is a poor substitute for presence, but sometimes it is the only thing that can cross an ocean quickly. Adam sent thank you notes written like they were typed through gritted teeth. A few times he sent voice messages. Twice he called crying, once he called drunk, once he called like a child calls from the top of a high diving board, asking if I was still watching. I told him I was. I asked him, 3 times over 3 years, to give me the kids' banking details so I could send funds directly when I needed to. He had reasons each time: they were too young, they would lose their cards, they had overdraft issues, they needed to learn to ask for help, he needed oversight because that was his job. I let him keep it. I believed it taught responsibility. I believed a son can be trusted with what his father cannot see. Delia would have asked to see the receipts herself. She would not have trusted a man who forgot her birthday twice to remember her values once. That is not to say Adam did not love his mother. He loved her in the comfortable ways. He did not love her in the ways that made him tired. The morning after the letters, I sat at the table with a cup of coffee that tasted like boiled bark and waited for someone to start being honest. It was Eva who sat across from me first. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from a wakeful battle against crying. I slid a plate of bread toward her. She did not touch it. "Did you really think we knew?" she asked. "No," I said. "I hoped you did. Those are different animals. Why did you not tell us yourself?" "Because your father convinced me it would be confusing for you to hear about money from 2 directions. He said you had enough noise." She swallowed. "Noise is cheaper than lies." I wanted to hug her. Some grandchildren have to be asked if they want to be held. Others start holding you the minute you open your arms. Eva used to be the second kind. When she was 7, she would fling herself at me bodily, as if she could knock the sadness out of me. Now she sat with her hands on the table like she had tied them there. Caleb came in next. He nodded at me and the nod was not unkind. Nora followed, hair wet from the shower, face set. "Your father will not come down," she said. "He said he has a meeting. On a Sunday." I nodded. "Of course." "I am sorry," she said suddenly. For how awkward that was. "It had to be awkward," I said. We had to see the shape of it without politeness smoothing it out. She winced. "Do you have proof?" "What word does proof belong to?" I asked quietly. "Do you mean, do I have enough paperwork to convince a judge? Or do you mean, do I have enough for my own heart?" "Both," she said. "I think both are going to matter." "I have what I need," I said. "I have the wires. I have the emails. I have a few of his voice messages saved. I did not save them because I doubted him then. I saved them because they made me feel needed." I watched the words settle on the table like dust you do not sweep because it is made of people. Caleb exhaled. "Grandpa, will you sue him?" "I will ask him to return what he took," I said. "If he tells me he cannot, I will ask a judge to help him decide that he can." "And if that tears the family apart," Nora whispered, "will you be able to live with that?" "I will live with what has already torn it," I said. "I will not pretend the tear is a seam." I wrote Adam first. It is polite to send a letter before you send a summons. I kept the letter short. I said what was sent when it was sent and why it was sent. I attached copies. I asked for an accounting. I asked for a plan. He did not respond for 2 days. Then he sent a single paragraph that said he had used his judgment to allocate family resources, and that, in his opinion, my wires were gifts to him as head of household during a period of family need. He said no court would interfere with that. I am not a lawyer. I taught history for 37 years to high school students who wanted dates to be faded and people to be flat. I taught them how to look again until the faces in the grain grew vivid and inconvenient. When I read Adam's paragraph, it reminded me of a pacifist pretending his sword is a shovel. I retained an attorney whose office was above a printer repair shop in a part of town where you can still find an honest mechanic. Her name is Marisol Pereira. She was 40, brisk, and occasionally smiled like a person who has not found many reasons to. She took my envelope, made tidy stacks on her desk, and asked for permission to speak without coddling. I do not need coddling, I said. You will tell me if you do, she replied, and began. We filed an action for conversion, fraud, unjust enrichment, and constructive trust. We asked for an accounting, prejudgment interest, and a temporary restraining order to prevent Adam from dissipating assets. Marisol said judges do not enjoy granting restraining orders for domestic financial matters unless the danger of dissipation is clear. She said we would make it clear. I learned words I wish I had never needed to know. I learned to respect the weight of an affidavit. I learned that money moves through a life like water, shaping things long after it is gone. When Adam was served, he called me. He did not say hello. You are suing your own son, he said. There was panic in the middle of his sentence and steel around the edges. I am asking you to answer for what you took, I said. I did not take. I spent. I kept this family upright. You kept yourself upright, I said. The kids bent until their backs hurt. What do you think a judge is going to do? Send me to prison for paying a mortgage? I think a judge is going to look at the memo lines and your emails and your voice notes. And then the judge is going to do arithmetic. I think your arithmetic will lose. He made a wounded sound. If you do not drop this, Dad, do not call me again. I did not plan to, I said. I planned to write. He hung up. Marisol deposed him 2 weeks later in a conference room that smelled like old dust and lemon oil. I sat quietly at the end of the table like a ghost from a photograph. Adam did not look at me. He looked at his own lawyer, a larger man who wore a tie like chain mail and interrupted more often than was useful. Mr. Avery, Marisol said, each question placed quietly on the table the way you place plates at a meal you do not want to drive anyone away from. Do you recognize these wire receipts? I do. Do you acknowledge that the memo lines reference specific grandchildren and purposes? I do. Did you use the funds for those purposes? I used them for our family. That was not my question. I used them for our family. She slid a small stack of color prints across. Can you explain the purchase of a 20-year-old fishing boat 3 months after a $10,000 wire marked Eva, Santa Cruz program and travel? He stared at the image as if it might explain itself. The boat was for the family. Marisol looked at him as if he had just presented her with a mathematical proof that equated blood and rain. Did any of the grandchildren set foot on the boat? Caleb, sitting behind Adam, whispered, "There is a boat." Adam's jaw shifted. Not yet. Can you explain the funds that went to your limited liability company 3 days after a wire for Nora's tuition? I was moving money to protect it. From what? From taxes. She asked about the roof, the minivan, and the kitchen remodel. He said the words family and house as if the echo itself would beat my petition back down the courthouse steps. She asked about the texts where he invented thank yous from children who had never spoken them. He said he must have misremembered. She asked about the voice notes he sent saying he had just left a meeting with Nora's bursar. He said those were figure of speech. When the deposition ended, Adam stood slowly and left without a word, without looking at me, without even the reflex of closing the door behind him for dignity's sake. The door swung shut on its own, the latch clicking with a small sound that hurt more than the gavel that would later follow it. Marisol leaned back and looked at me. "I cannot promise outcomes," she said. "But I am not worried about our narrative." "Do not promise outcomes," I said. "Promise me you will not let me make this about making him bleed." "I can promise to keep you focused on making your grandchildren whole," she said. "That is the same promise," I said, "when you look from a different distance." While the case crawled forward, our family moved in strange circles. Nora wrote me a letter in pen so dark it almost cut the paper. "Grandpa. I feel angry and guilty at the same time. I am angry at Dad for obvious reasons. I am guilty because part of me is relieved. I have been telling myself I must have done something wrong for it to be this hard. I am relieved to know it was not all my fault. Relief feels like betrayal. I know that does not make sense, but that is what it feels like. I am sorry. I keep thinking of Grandma's hands on my head when I was little. Do you remember how she would hold us? I think we all thought love was a kind of roof you could not see but always hear when it rained. If there was a hole in the roof, we would know. I guess the roof can be missing in one room and you can still be dry in another if you do not walk there. I wish we had walked there sooner. Love. Nora. Caleb sent me 3 text messages late at night like a confession he did not want daylight to hear. I had to sell my guitar last fall. I did not tell anyone because I was embarrassed. I thought I would buy it back after the season ended at the restaurant and I got more shifts. I miss it like a person. I am not a music guy really, I know that sounds silly, but I want you to know I want it to be something and not just a problem. I am saving for another guitar. I will pay you back the difference. I am sorry. Eva called me. Her voice is gentler than her siblings. She told me something I had not expected. She had stopped asking her father for help in 11th grade because she learned that asking made him angrier than not eating did. I was quiet for a long time after she said that, and then I told her about Delia's folder marked Mercy, and how a person can die and keep teaching you what you were sure you already knew. We saw Adam only in court filings and hallways. He grew thinner. His hair looked like it had been combed by a man who wants to break a mirror but cannot afford to replace it. I cannot tell you I felt nothing. I felt enough to fill a second envelope. I did not bring it to court. The day of the preliminary injunction hearing, rain came like a polite guest, steady, light, everything brighter afterward. The courtroom was small, the judge heavy-eyed, the calendar full. People whispered as if the benches themselves had ears. Marisol tapped her pen softly twice on the table to steady her breath and stood. In the end, there is very little theater in justice when it is working. It is mostly documents and the slow movement of a mind noticing where a pattern does not fit. The judge asked Marisol to explain why she should temporarily freeze a portion of Adam's assets. Marisol walked her through the wires, the memo lines, the emails, the statements, the false thanks, the boat, the limited liability company. She asked the court to preserve enough funds to prevent irreparable harm to the intended beneficiaries while the case continued. Adam's lawyer argued gifts, head of household discretion, emergencies, and the flexible nature of familial obligations. He said we wanted the state to parent the private, and that this would be a chilling precedent. He said the grandchildren had been fed and housed. He said the house is a child too, and sometimes you must feed the house so it does not eat the people. The judge did not smile. Judges rarely do. She asked Adam one question directly. When you wrote, tuition for Nora, in a memo line, what did you think those 4 words meant? He tried to answer with many more words. She interrupted. What did you think those 4 words meant? That I intended to address tuition, he said finally. Did you? With the household budget, yes. Did $1 of that wire go to the bursar? No, he said, eyes down. She granted the injunction. She was careful. She froze half the contested sum in a separate account under a constructive trust labeled Avery Grandchildren, to be held pending the final adjudication. She ordered him to submit a full accounting within 10 days. She told both lawyers she expected less thunder and more light. On the way out of the courthouse, we passed the sheriff's board. There is a moment after a hearing when you are still walking inside your own argument and the real world around you looks like a translation. I nearly walked into the metal stand where notices hang. On it was an unrelated auction sheet for a different house on a different street with a different family's pain. I remember the way the tape pulled at the page's corner and how unremarkable that looked. The inevitable rarely looks dramatic when it is posted. Months passed. Adam's accounting read like a calendar of wishes. Money intended for school went to repairs. Money intended for repairs went to a business account named after a landscape company that mowed 3 lawns in 2 years. Money intended for food went to a contractor who built a pergola that shaded a patio no one sat on. None of it was criminal on its face. Much of it was fraudulent in its spirit. By the time we sat for trial, Nora had finished her degree by braiding together 2 jobs, a series of ramen and egg dinners, and an endurance I pray she uses one day for joy. Caleb had begun night classes to learn welding. Eva had saved enough to buy a used camera and had started taking portraits of neighbors and their dogs for $5. They all came to court. They did not sit near their father. On the stand, they were precise. They said they had not received what the memo lines promised. They said their father told them I was less generous than they had believed. They said they had not wanted to believe that, but it made their lives make a certain kind of weary sense. They spoke as if speaking itself were a bruise. None of them raised their voice. When Adam testified, he spoke of family as if it were a boat, and himself as if he were the only one who knew how to row. He listed the costs of keeping a home open. He tried to shame me for trusting a foreign country to a man of my age. He said he was the eldest who stayed while I ran, and that the court could not understand what it takes to raise children these days. Marisol did not ask whether he loved his children. She asked whether he loved their money. In closing, she said, "Your Honor, there is a difference between standing in a doorway and standing between." Mr. Avery stood between. He intercepted funds meant for the grandchildren and used them for his own priorities. He would like to call those priorities family. The receipts call them something else. The judge took time. When she returned, she spoke slowly. She found for me and for the grandchildren on conversion and unjust enrichment. She imposed a constructive trust over the frozen funds and extended it over additional amounts to be collected through judgment. She awarded interest and fees. She stopped short of punitive damages, which disappointed the part of me that wanted thunder, but the rest of me recognized light. Adam did not look at me when the judge finished. He looked at his hands and left the courtroom quickly, his lawyer a half-step behind like a shadow that has lost the body that made it. Enforcement is its own grim art. People think winning means the money appears. Money is shy, it rarely approaches the person who is right. We filed liens. We sent writs. The boat sold quickly, and I allowed myself the unhelpful picture of it floating away as if it were a moral releasing itself into the sea. The pergola fetched less. The limited liability company had less in it than the logo implied. The house we left until last because 3 adults still lived in it, and though they were all over 18, I could not stomach making anyone carry their bed into a truck while my name sat on the paperwork. The sheriff posted the notice because that is the geometry of a judgment when a man will not pay what he owes and has run out of other people's umbrellas to stand under. The notice did what notices do, nothing for a while, then everything. It drew neighbors. It made a cousin call from 2 states away with a long message that may have been an apology for not calling sooner. It brought Adam to my door for the first time in months. He did not knock. He stood on my porch until I came out. He was holding the paper like he did not understand the meaning of his own address. "Dad," he said, and the word sounded broken rather than sharp. "Do not do this." "I am not doing this," I said. "Your math is. You will put me on the street. You will move when the sale moves you. There are apartments and couches and people who will help you for their own reasons. None of those reasons are mine to name." He closed his eyes. "I will pay you back. I will. I swear. Just give me time." "You had time," I said. 3 years of it while your children ate less than they should. "Do you want me dead?" He asked it quietly, not as a melodrama, but as a person whose mind has only 2 choices left, win or disappear. "I want you to be small enough to be honest," I said. "I want you to pick up a phone when it weighs less than this one did. I want you to stop living like the role of father is a cape that keeps your shirt clean while it powders everyone else with dust." We stood quietly while a neighbor's sprinkler counted its own beats across the street. He folded the notice and unfolded it and folded it again. "Finally," he said, "if I bring you half from a buyer who will close in 2 weeks without the auction, will you release your lien so I can keep the equity I still have?" "Bring me half with proof of funds," I said. "Bring me an escrow officer's name that I can call myself. Then will I release my lien in exchange for the wire into the Avery Grandchildren Trust. I will give you 14 days. After that, the sheriffs will return with tape." He nodded once. It was a nod that contained more years than the time it took to make it. He found a buyer. He found the escrow. He brought half, and the wire flashed on my phone like a sudden blessing from a reluctant sky. I released the lien. The sale closed. He moved to a 2-bedroom on the other side of town with windows that faced a wall of trees that have no opinions. People survive from those views all the time. After the case was done, after the money sat in a trust like a seed bank, Nora came to my rental and stood in the doorway the way her grandmother used to when she had a surprise that was simple and good. "I quit my bar job," she said. "I found a research assistant position for a professor who studies freshwater policy. It pays less, but it pays in a way that I can live with." "Live with," I repeated, liking the shape of that phrase in my mouth. "Caleb got into the welding program," she added. "He starts in August." "Does his program need a guitar?" I asked. She smiled. "Already handled." He cried. He cried about strings. "Good," I said. "Strings are worth it." "Eva wants to travel," Nora said. She applied to a semester program in Europe and got in. She asked me if I thought you would be mad if she went. "Mad?" I said. "I would be mad if she stayed only because fear pays better up front." Nora took a breath. "What if we all came? What if we lived with you for a while? Not forever. Just until we figure out who we are without debt being the loudest voice in the house. What if we tried a place where the bread smells like a story and water does not frighten us? I had thought of asking, but I did not want the asking to sound like loneliness dressing itself up as generosity. I kept my face still because this is one of the lessons age teaches: if you smile too quickly, you might scare away the thing you most want. "You can have my bedroom," I said. "I sleep on the couch fine. It smells like flour." She laughed, then caught herself in the doorway with her hand and looked down at her shoes. "Thank you," she said, and this was the first time in our lives when thank you did not mean nothing and did not mean less than nothing and did not mean I do not have the mail to answer this properly. It meant thank you. You learn a lot about a person at a passport office. How they wait. How they adjust a photograph they do not like and cannot change. How they speak to the person behind the glass who is the first person in a long line of people who will simply follow the rules they were given. We went together. The clerk liked Eva because she smiled with all her teeth and asked a question about the stamp pad that made the clerk laugh. The clerk liked Caleb because he said thank you 3 times without sounding like someone who has learned to say thank you to make a gate open. The clerk liked Nora because she had every paper arranged in a folder with tabs that looked like flags. When the passports arrived, we put them on the table and did not open them. We waited until everyone was there. Then Eva started clapping like a child and we all started laughing because there is no good reason not to clap when the government mails you a small book that says, in effect, go. We went. The first morning, I woke to the sound of 3 young adults in a kitchen that is smaller than any kitchen has a right to be for 4 people. They are not truly young anymore by the world's measurements, but they are young enough to start. They were quiet out of respect for my age until I told them we will respect each other by not whispering. We bought fruit at the market. Eva took pictures of a woman whose stall was more flowers than fruit. Caleb stared at a knife maker's booth like a man who had found the church he did not know he had needed. Nora asked in careful Portuguese how to say, "Thank you for the lemons, they smell like morning." The vendor repeated the sentence back to her with patience and corrected the verb tense gently, the way you tuck a sheet under a mattress so it does not wrinkle later. We walked to the ferry at noon and crossed to Troia to see water where it gets deep enough to remind you that small boats matter. The gulls followed us, and the children laughed at the way the birds seemed to scold us for feeding them bread that had once been baked not to end up at sea in pieces. I watched their faces from the side. I catalogued a new geometry of their smiles and realized I had not seen those exact versions before. Relief has an architecture. It builds around a person like a porch you did not realize you were allowed to sit on. I set aside the trust distributions deliberately. We did not spend them all at once. We did not buy cars or watches. We did not buy anything we could not carry up 2 flights of stairs without help. We used the money to buy time. I believe time is the only true currency that appreciates in value when shared. Nora began writing policy notes for her research professor remotely, sending memos from our table while the church bell across the square insisted on telling time too often. Caleb joined an English-speaking construction crew in the afternoons, helping repair a pier. He returned home with hands skinned by wood and proud as if he were building a new piece of a body. Eva took portraits of strangers in the square and handed them 5x7s a week later with a kindness that made them cry. Adam wrote. The first letter was 10 lines. The second was 40. The third did not know how to end and did not end well. He did not ask for money. He asked for reasons. He asked whether I could have waited. He asked whether I meant to humiliate him. He asked where I had learned to be cruel. I answered once, in a single page I revised as if I were correcting a student essay 20 years too late. Adam. I waited 3 years. I did not mean to humiliate you. I meant to rescue the promise I made to your mother when she died. I meant to move money from where it was lying to where it could stand. Where did I learn to be cruel? If holding you to what you promised is cruelty, then I learned it from history, where people have always found ways to rename theft. It is not new. I am not new. You are not new. But you can be different. So can I, Dad. Nora chose not to write back to him for a long time. Then she sent him a single photograph of the river with no caption. Caleb visited him before he left, and they stood in the driveway for 10 minutes, two men whose hands did not know whether they belonged to touching or to building. Eva apologized, out loud and to no one, every time she told a story that did not show her father at a moment of his best self. I told her an apology is one of the few riches we can give without being poorer afterward. The only blood we saw belonged to the fish Caleb filleted so clumsily that first month that we ended up eating bread and olives because the fish surrendered too much of itself and made us laugh at our hunger. My revenge was legal and quiet. It was a judgment that moved money from one ledger to another and from one future to three. It was collars unstarched, boats sold, and kitchens and rentals too small for pride to perform in. It was a trust account named for three people who did not understand until their early 20s that I had been trying to love them across an ocean with numbers and the wrong messenger. If we need spectacle to feel satisfied, then life will let us down often. My satisfaction was modest. I saw my grandchildren pay tuition on time. I saw Caleb place a new guitar carefully on a chair and then talk to it like a friend he had not seen since spring. I saw Eva sell a portrait to a couple who could not believe they looked at each other that way when seen by a stranger's lens. I saw Nora write a memo that changed a line in a city council draft that will allow a creek to go on being a creek. If that does not sound like revenge to you, then I accept that you and I read the same word with different eyes. In October, on the day the rain came in sideways and the gulls took that as an insult, we made soup together and talked about Delia. We had not done that in years. We said her name without whispering. I told them about the time she refused to wear the good coat to the gala and wore the bad coat because she said coats are more honest at night. Nora told me she remembers Delia's fingers in her hair and a lullaby that was half hum and half silence. Caleb said Grandma taught him to cut an onion without fear. Eva said Delia once told her to keep a notebook because the world will not remember for you what you need to remember for yourself. We did not talk about Adam. Not in that hour. Not in that room. Not because we had finished talking about him forever, but because he no longer needed to be the roof over our heads in every conversation we had about the weather. Adam came to Portugal in June with a letter that I believe cost him more than the plane ticket. He did not warn us. He rang the bell and stood on the stoop in a windbreaker that made a small noise every time he breathed. I let him in. I did not hug him and I did not step back. He did not cry. He sat. He looked at the bowl of lemons like it contained an answer. I lost the boat, he said. I lost the house. I did not lose my children, not completely, but I lost the version of myself that believed they owed me gratitude for keeping them from falling into holes I dug. We were quiet a long time. I poured coffee because that is what you pour for men you have known since they were small. The coffee said nothing unhelpful. Do you want money? I asked finally. He shook his head. I want to be allowed to become a person whose letters do not read like a lawyer wrote them. Allowed is a strange word, I said, for a man with his own legs. He looked down. He nodded. Do you want me to leave? He asked. No, I said. I want you to stay until you remember how to ask for bread without calling it a loan. He stayed the afternoon. He walked with me to the bakery and did not argue with the baker when the baker refused his money. He watched Nora take notes. He watched Caleb carry wood. He watched Eva pose a couple against a wall painted the kind of blue that does not exist in houses that do not see salt. He asked no questions about the trust and no questions about the judgment. He asked me whether I had any of Delia's old recipes. We found one for lemon cake and we read it together without making it because the oven is temperamental and I did not want to ruin the day with the smoke alarm. When he left at dusk, Eva hugged him. Caleb shook his hand. Nora walked him to the corner. I sat in the window and watched the way the shadows made him taller as he turned down the alley. I will not tell you we are healed. People do not heal like roads, with one machine and one day of fresh gravel. We heal like a coastline, slow and with the understanding that the water that smooths us also keeps trying to take us back. But we are on the shore together. I have learned to stretch a day so it can hold more than one kind of truth. We eat. We work. We laugh at jokes that are not invented to keep pain away, but show up after pain left the room because we allowed it to. Money sits in a trust account under a name that reminds me of what the judge said, and sometimes I check the balance not because I need to but because there is a comfort in numbers that tell you they have not moved without asking you first. I still write to Adam. He writes back. Our letters are boring now sometimes, which is its own grace. He tells me about a small project landscaping rental patios for people who do not care about pergolas but love potted herbs. He sends pictures of his hands with soil and the lines, and I find that I am happy for the dirt. When I sit at my window and look out at the ferry and the bright shirts of the children on the quay, I try to remember the first envelope. I do not regret it. I regret only that I did not bring it sooner to the table where it belonged, where it made the noise that paper makes when it tells the truth. I regret that I did not ask for the bank details and insist. I regret that Delia is not here to put a hand on my shoulder and tell me to stop turning regret into a hobby. I learned a simple lesson, to trust with your eyes open. Write the memo line like a promise. Send the money where it is meant to go. If you cannot be there, be exact. If you can be there, be present. And if anyone uses the word family to name the hunger of a house or the needs of a single father's pride, ask them to set the word down where you can see it. Then move it to where it belongs. Tonight, Eva will bring home pictures of strangers who will look like relatives in the right light. Caleb will tell me the sound a torch makes when it meets metal in a way that feels like a prayer. Nora will explain a policy note so patiently that even the fishmonger will understand why the creek needed the language it got. We will eat bread. We will talk about Delia. We will send nothing by wire and everything by hand. I promised in that courtroom to make the truth undeniable. I did. The sheriff posted the notice, the gavel fell, the accounts changed names, the children changed directions. But the revenge that satisfied me most was not the notice on the door. It was watching my grandchildren live in a house that does not lie to them. Sometimes, late, when the market sleeps and the ferry horn calls to nobody, I stand at the window and say it out loud in the small apartment that smells like bread. You are safe here. I say it because someone should, and because I can. I say it because quiet love is still love, and because if Delia taught me anything, it is that mercy works better when you do not announce it. I say it because my grandchildren, grown or not, are still listening. I say it for Adam, too, even if he is not within these walls to hear it, because maybe words can cross the ocean better than wires did. And in the morning, I will make coffee, and the gulls will scold us for feeding them, and the day will begin with exactly the right kind of noise.
Greetings, and thanks for spending your time with us today. I truly hope you enjoyed the video. I want to wish you a peaceful day or a restful evening, wherever you may be. Take care, and we'll see you next time.